All right, let's talk about Eddard IX. We finished up with Catelyn 6 last time, which, by the way, is the longest chapter in a Game of Thrones. Um, by the way, one person mentioned, how did you not catch the passage in which Catelyn says that her heart turned to stone, and not connect it with Lady Stoneheart last time? It slipped my mind. I mean, it's most likely a coincidence. It's doubtful that at this point in the story, George knows that he's bringing Catelyn back as an undead zombie. I mean, it's very, he only briefly um, changed the story. I mean, it's not that long before that he changed the story from her going north of the wall and dying. So he's changing the story a lot. I don't think he was thinking about Lady Stoneheart that early, back here in a Game of Thrones. Anyway, Eddard IX, though. Eddard IX is an incredibly short chapter. It's not the shortest in Game of Thrones. It might be the fourth or fifth shortest chapter. It is. It's breezy. It's action packed. Um, uh, it's got some weirdness to it. We'll get to those weird parts when we come to it. But this is famous for some weird passages that fans have never really been able to explain. Anyway, Eddard IX. He found Littlefinger in the brothel's common room, chatting amiably with a tall, elegant woman who wore a feathered gown over skin of blackening. This is Shataya that Littlefinger is talking to, because this is Shataya's brothel. It's not even Littlefinger's brothel, but Littlefinger knew about Shataya's brothel. By the hearth, Heward and a buxom wench were playing at forfeits. From the look of it, he'd lost his belt, his cloak, his mail shirt, and his right boot so far, while the girl had been forced to unbutton her shift to the waist. This is so in Victorian times, there was this game called Forfeits. It's essentially it's kind of like Truth or Dare. Essentially, the participants would take off an item of clothing or item of jewelry and put it in a pot in the middle, and then the group decides on what activity the person has to perform to get their item back. And so you forfeited something, and so the idea is that you'd sing a silly song, or you'd stand on your head, or that kind of thing, or maybe something more provocative. But it was essentially like Truth or Dare, or answer a question or whatever, and the item was the thing that you'd lose if you didn't do it. And so the idea is that you become more and more naked, or lose more and more of your jewelry or whatever. There was either a financial or a shame aspect to it. But here it's a little different, and we'll get to that. Because you can understand, if it were a classic game of forfeits, clearly the woman is asking him to do things, and he's unwilling to do them. So he's losing his clothes, while she is bold and willing to do anything. And so she is not that naked. But then later it says Jory Cassell stood beside a rain-streaked window with a wry smile on his face. Wry is like mocking. Watching Heward turn over tiles and enjoying the view. So now it seems that it's not the traditional game of forfeits. It seems to just be they're playing strip poker. That he's turning over tiles and losing money, and they're gambling clothing. So it seems like they're just playing strip poker and not the traditional Victorian game of forfeits. But so it seems to be something like that. Ned paused at the foot of the stair and pulled on his gloves. It's time we took our leave. My business is done here. Heward lurched to his feet, hurriedly gathering up his things. As you will, my lord, Jory said. I'll help while bring around the horses. He strode to the door. Littlefinger took his time saying his farewells. He kissed the black woman's hand, whispering some joke that made her laugh, and sauntered over to Ned. Your business, he said lightly. Or Robert's. They say the hand dreams the king's dreams, speaks with the king's voice, and rules with the king's sword. Does that also mean he fucks with the king's... Lord Baelish, Ned interrupted. You presume too much. I'm not ungrateful for your help. It might have taken us years to find this brothel without you. That does not mean I intend to endure your mockery. I am no longer the king's hand. I think there's a bit of a retcon on how important Shataya's brothel is. Here, it's one brothel among hundreds, and so it would have taken him years to find it. But then later we find out that Shataya's brothel is it's the best brothel. It's the freaking best brothel. It's the brothel that Anguy the Archer goes to when he wins all that money. It's the brothel that Tywin and Tyrion all prefer. Like, it's just the best brothel. It should be the first brothel they were going to, considering it's just famously the best brothel in town with the best sex workers, the prettiest sex workers. Why they wouldn't go there first is ridiculous. But to say that it would take him years to find it, okay. But like I said, it's a bit of a retcon that Shataya's brothel is made into the best brothel and the most famous brothel that all the characters seem to be going to. The direwolf must be a prickly beast, said Littlefinger with a sharp twist of his mouth. This is an important thing, that I am no longer the king's hand. Had he been the king's hand, Jaime might not have attacked him in the streets later on in this chapter. And of course, when Catelyn did her actions, she's assuming that her husband is the king's hand. And here even though they're he's in this situation where Tyrion has been kidnapped, Ned puts himself in danger by surrendering his post and his shield. It was a pretty dumb move of Ned. Very, very dumb move. A warm rain was pelting down from a starless black sky as they walked to the stables. Ned drew up the hood of his cloak. Jory brought out his horse. Young Weil came right behind him, leading Littlefinger's mare with one hand while the other fumbled with his belt and lacings of his trousers. A bare whore leaned out the stable door, giggling at him. A barefoot whore leaned out the stable door, giggling at him. So Weil was partaking in some sex work. Will we be going back to the castle now, my lord? Jory asked. Ned nodded and swung into the saddle. Littlefinger mounted up beside him. Jory and the others followed. Shataya runs a choice establishment, Littlefinger said as they rode. I've half a mind to buy it. Brothels are a much sounder investment than ships, I've found. Whores seldom sink, and when they're boarded by pirates, why, the pirates pay good coin like everyone else. Lord Peter chuckled at his own wit. He's just coming up with his own little... It's funny, these jokes, because a lot of times in Ice and Fire, people have like leading lines, and then the clever character finishes it. So like the Theon chapter where he's walking through with Asha and everyone's just like saying clearly leading lines for her jokes, and then she like does the punchline. Like that happens in all the Asha chapters where you're just like, oh my gosh, you set it all up for her to knock it down. It happens with Tyrion a lot too. Like people set a joke up for Tyrion and then he just knocks it down. But with Littlefinger, he doesn't even need anybody around him to do that. He just says jokes out of the blue that no one wants to hear, or no one around him wants to hear. Ned let him prattle on. After a time, he quieted and they rode in silence. The streets of King's Landing were dark and deserted. The rain had driven everyone under their roofs. It beat down on Ned's head, warm as blood and relentless as old guilt's. And this is the question of like, what is the old guilt? What is the old guilt? Fat drops of rain ran down his face. Robert will never keep to one bed Lyanna had told him at Winterfell. And this is the yeah. So this is the thing is Robert Ned feels guilty about something with Lyanna, with the promise me, and later he even talks about his a broken promise, and so there's some sort of guilt and some sort of broken promise with Lyanna, and so this never sat with me very well because if the promise is protect Jon Snow, yeah, Ned did that, so it's that's not a broken promise. He did exactly what he was promised to do. So I no one has ever given me a very good explanation for what Ned is feeling guilty about and what the broken promise was. Um, had it been something like put my son on the throne or tell my son who he is or something like that, but he still has time. It's not yet a broken promise. The whole thing, like protect me, Ned, protect him, is not really an old guilt or a broken promise. So no one's ever really given me a good answer on what the broken promise was. So it's I mean, again, George might have just mystery boxed this and not really had a solution himself. Robert will never go to keep the one bed Lyanna had told him at Winterfell on the long night ago when their father had promised her hand to the young lord of Storm's End. I hear he had gotten a child on some girl in the Vale. Ned had held the baby in his arms. He could scarcely deny her. This is, of course, Maya Stone, who we were introduced to last chapter. Nor would he lie to his sister. But he had assured her that what Robert did before their betrothal was of no matter, that he was a good man and true and would love her with all his heart. That is true as well. I mean, we're not sure what Robert's actions would have been, but Robert was at least obsessed with, I mean, I don't know about love, but he's at least obsessed with Lyanna. Lyanna had only smiled. Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature. The girl had been... also, the weirdest thing about this paragraph, and people bring this up a lot, this is a contradiction that is not lost on most fans, is that Lyanna seems to be worried about Robert's infidelity. And yet there's a general belief that Lyanna is in a romantic relationship with Rhaegar, who is married. So he's committing infidelity by being with Lyanna. Now people can say, oh, human beings are obviously hypocrites, and Lyanna's very young. She's very young at this point. And this kind of gets into it. Is Lyanna, when she gets betrothed, this is the thing, is when does Lyanna get betrothed? At 13 or 14 years old? I'm going to look it up. Because she's at least... She dies when she's about 16, which means she is 14 at Harrenhal. And we know that she's betrothed before Harrenhal. So she's around 13 or 14 years old at this point, which when she's making these comments about Robert's infidelity. And which fits because Ned constantly looks at Sansa and thinks of Lyanna. Or looks at Arya and thinks of Lyanna. So Ned remembers Lyanna as being young. And so this transitions then, and we're supposed to conflate this, but he immediately goes to, the girl had been so young, Ned had not dared to ask her age. Now, obviously, he's talking about the sex worker here, but we're supposed to conflate it with Lyanna. which is why George R. Martin had left the girl here. Because at first we're supposed to be like, wait, are we talking about Lyanna? No, we're talking about the sex worker. But they're supposed to be of an age. It's rather clear that the sex worker that Robert impregnated was probably around 13 or 14 years old. No doubt she'd been a virgin. The better brothels could always find a virgin if the purse was fat enough. She had light red hair and powdered freckles across the bridge of her nose. And when she slipped free a breast and gave her nipple to the babe, he saw that her bosom was freckled as well. Now, remember, now we're in this chain of conflation. Like, Sansa at this point is 13 years old, with red hair. You can imagine that Ned is seeing. He's thinking about Lyanna, who he already conflates with Sansa. He now sees Bara, who looks a lot like Sansa. Like it's all very creepy and horrible in Ned's head. Like all of the situation. There is like a lot of subtext here. I named her Bara. She said, as the child nursed, "She looks like him, doesn't she, my lord? She has his nose and his hair." Oh, I'm sorry, though. I forgot what's the sex worker's name? Do we ever know? I don't want to confuse it because the Bara is the daughter. The sex worker's name is what? Oh no, we never get the name of the sex worker. The sex worker is never named. Okay. Bara is the daughter, though. So obviously the hair is the important aspect here because of the hair color thing going on in the story about, dominant genes and things like this. However, I will say, if you're one to have kids, you very know that the hair on a baby does not necessarily correspond to what happens to the kid's hair later on. A lot of times your kid is born with dark hair and it lightens up. A lot of times your kid is born with light hair and it darkens up. For example, my son was born with black hair. It all fell out, and then the new set came in, and it was brown, my brown. So it's these sorts of things just happen. And I think the classic case is most kids, they're born with blonde hair or have blonde hair when they're young, and then it darkens up. So but things just happen. She does. Eddard Stark had touched the baby's fine dark hair. It flowed through his fingers like black silk. Robert's firstborn had the same fine hair, he seemed to recall. And he's talking about Maya. "Tell him when you see him, my lord. As it please you. Tell him how beautiful she is." "I will," Ned had promised her. That was his curse. Robert would swear undying love and forget them even before evenfall. But Ned kept his vows. Ned Stark kept his vows. And yet there's this guilt and broken promises. He thought of the promise. Here it is. He thought of the promises he'd made Lyanna as she lay dying and the price he'd paid to keep them. Promises. What are these several promises? So there's more than one promise. Later he thinks about broken promises. So at this point, he's kept the promises to Lyanna, but when he's arrested, he thinks about broken promises. So I don't know what goes from, his here to there. What promise ends up being broken? I don't think there's a good explanation. I've never heard one in all of my years of analyzing this. There's just never been a good explanation, even with baby swaps and all sorts of stuff, and thinking that Daenerys is the child and things like that. What's the broken promise? What's the broken promise? I don't know. Um, I mean, I guess no. I mean, the baby swap with Daenerys does make more sense now. Because if the promise is protect my child, and then Ned is told that the baby is dead. Oh wait, no, but then by Varys, he's like, oh sorry, the assassin's already off, and that would make it a broken promise if the promise were to protect Dany. This gets into why like the R plus L equals D, like you know, fits better in many ways based on this information in a Game of Thrones. But again, like do I actually think like George did that? I don't know, or left it open. I think he just mystery boxed this and wasn't really thinking about it. Anyway, and tell him I've been with no one else. I swear it, my lord. By the gods and the new, Shataya could have said I could have half a year for the baby, and I'm hoping he'd come back. So you'll tell him I'm waiting, won't you? I don't want no jewels or nothing, just him. He was always good to me, truly. Um, so the idea of a sex worker being exclusive and being a virgin, it's a reoccurring thing in the story. So Tyrion, for example, when he gets Shay, he says, "Okay, you can only be with me." Um, and then later on in A Feast for Crows, Pate is very worried about Rosie being a virgin and wants to be the only person that she's with. And even in earlier drafts, he's very specifically worried about sexually transmitted diseases. With all of the frequenting of sex work establishments, like you'd think there'd be more diseases and more talk of diseases in Ice and Fire, but there's only a little bit. I mean, we do get Daron, who after this who dies of pox from sex work, but and later in the earlier drafts of the Feast for Crows prologue, like it's clearly Pate is fearing the danger of pox, but all the other characters, no other characters, they just kind of go. They just kind of go. He was always good to me, truly. Good to you, Ned thought howily. I will tell him, child, I promise you. Bara shall not go wanting. She had smiled then, a smile so tremulous and sweet that it cut the heart out of him. Riding through the rainy night, Ned saw Jon Snow's face in front of him, so like a younger version of his own. If the gods frowned on bastards, he thought dully, why did he fill men with such lusts? Lord Baelish, what did you do? What do you know of Robert's bastards? And I think this is why a lot of people connect Jon like early on, because he's thinking about Lyanna and he thinks about Rhaegar and he thinks about Jon in the middle. So I think here's a bit of evidence of R plus L equals J, even though this is coming from specifically thinking about bastards. But if he's thinking about if you go through his memories in order, it's Lyanna, Jon, and then comes to Rhaegar. Well, he has more than you for a start. How many? Littlefinger shrugged. Rivulets of moisture twisted down the back of his cloak. Doesn't matter. If you bet enough women, some will give you presents, and his grace has never been shy on that count. I know he's acknowledged that boy at Storm's End, the one he fathered the night Lord Stannis wed, he could hardly do otherwise. The mother was a Florent, niece to the Lady Selise, one of her bedmaids. Renly says Robert carried the girl upstairs during the feast and broke in the wedding bed while Stannis and his brides were still dancing. Lord Stannis seemed to think that was a blot on his honor and of his wife's house, and so when the boy was born, he shipped him off to Renly. He gave Ned a sideways glance. I've always now this inclusion of Edric Storm, it's a little bit. I mean, I do wonder if this was added in later. Like George gets to the end of the book and he's kind of realizing what he wants to do with Stannis, and retroactively shoves it in because when he gets to the end of Game of Thrones, he's already writing the beginning of the Clash of Kings, and it's a bit weird and clumsy, like where he just shoves in this long explanation of Edric Storm out of nowhere. Because you could delete this and then just say, I've heard whispers that Robert got a pair of twins, like that would have been the response. But instead you get this long shoved in story about Edric Storm. And like, why wouldn't Littlefinger mention Maya Stone? When it's rather public about Maya Stone, he says, how many? You'd go, well, there's, obviously Maya Stone, and then there's Edric Storm, but instead it's like, doesn't matter. I know he's acknowledged the one at Storm's End, it's, I'm suspicious that this section was shoved in later. But anyway, because the more important information is this. I've heard whispers that Robert got a pair of twins on a serving wench at Casterly Rock. 3 years ago, when he went west for Lord Tywin's tourney, Cersei had the babies killed and sold the mother to a passing slaver, much too much an affront to Lannister pride, that close to home. So the fandom debates this a bit. Did Cersei actually have these twins killed? She never thinks about them in her own head. People insist that Cersei, as evil as she is, doesn't want to kill kids. Besides, like, malaria when she was a kid herself, which is a little different. Like doing something evil to a peer versus doing something evil to a child, someone much younger, is different. But so it's very odd because when people talk, especially when people bring up like, oh, would Cersei order Bran be murdered? And everyone's like, Cersei would never do that, not to a kid, and she scolds Jaime for it, even though Jaime later is like, oh, she wanted Arya murdered, but she actually never says that. So George is kind of I guess he's being very secretive on how evil Cersei is. And what is too far for her. But, and then immediately after this story, also the passing slavers is weird. But of course, it's weird enough that there's passing slavers for Jorah Mormont to sell poachers to. I address this in the fanfic a bit and say, well, like maybe people go up to get wildlings for slavery and they don't want to go up the narrow sea because of the Braavosi. And so it's a safer route to go up and grab slaves from wildling slaves, like on that route. But it's way out of the way. It's way out of the way. And considering how like cheap slaves are, it's also like kind of odd. Even in our horrible world, slaves were really expensive. They were really expensive. They say a slave was like the equivalent of, you know, $70,000 or $80,000 by today's money. Sorry, that's the power going out. Um, the but the but slaves, they're so cheap in the world of Ice and Fire. To train an Unsullied, like only 1 out of 3 survive the training, and they're just killing people off right and left, and stripping babies out of mothers' arms and killing them, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like the amount of like cost. So it's a little weird that somebody's going all the way around Westeros, like all the way up to do slaving, because there's no slaving in Westeros. So like some sailors, like, I'm gonna go all the way up to Bear Island for some slaves. You're like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing when there's, so many people and just floating around Essos and slavery is so cheap? The economics of it doesn't make sense, but George is not great at economics. So, but nonetheless, it might be that the story is bull. And in fact, in the next sentence, Ned Stark grimaced. Ugly tales like that were told of every great lord in the realm. Like, people make stuff up all the time. There's always some rumor that whoever the president is, that they had somebody murdered, and whoever the president is, like, there's some story about affairs, and it's so weird. So stuff just made up, just gets made up all the time. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But of course, even recognizing that the tale might be a lie, Ned instantly is like, whatever, he could believe it readily enough because it's Cersei Lannister, which goes to show, like, a lot of these stories, this goes for us in the modern world. If you're apt to believe it in the first place, you will believe it. So it doesn't matter, And if you're the type of person to not believe in the first place, it doesn't matter. So it's just this thing that reinforces. So Littlefinger is reinforcing Ned's mistrust of Cersei here. But would the king stand by and let it happen? Well, this gets into the Robert letting children be killed when Tywin took King's Landing. The Robert he'd known would not have, but the Robert he had known had never been so practiced as shutting his eyes to things he wished he did not wish to see. Why would Jon Arryn take a sudden interest in the king's baseborn children? I mean, at this point, it seems that Ned has figured out the hair thing. He's like touching the hair and talking about the hair, and yet he's still kind of being like, what's the deal here? The short man gave a sodden shrug. Sodden. Sodden means... it means saturated with water. So he's just like, because he's wet, he gives a sodden shrug. He was the king's hand. Doubtless Robert asked him to see that they were provided for. Ned was soaked through to the bone, and his soul had grown cold. I mean, keep in mind the water's warm, so this is him cold about the topic. It had to be more than that. Or why kill him? And here he kind of reveals to Littlefinger that he thinks that Jon Arryn was murdered. Right? Is this the first time he kind of reveals to Littlefinger that I think Jon Arryn was murdered? Littlefinger shook the rain from his hair and laughed. Now I see. Lord Arryn learned that his grace had filled the bellies of some whores and fishwives, and for that he had to be silenced. Small wonder. Allow a man like that to live, and the next he's to blurt out that the sun rises in the east. That's a pretty good joke. This is just, it's so obvious that Robert is going around siring bastards. Everyone knows this. Um, so why would, you know, it would be the equivalent of silencing people that tell you that the sun rises in the east. But of course, like, that kind of goes against this story of like him fathering the twins. That there'd be no need, because everyone knows that that Robert is doing this kind of stuff. There was no answer Ned Stark could give to that but a frown. For the first time in years, he found himself remembering Rhaegar Targaryen. He wondered if Rhaegar had frequented brothels. Somehow he thought not. So it's really fans and me, we just kind of hate this line. Like, it's just like Ned has been talking about Rhaegar Targaryen already, like several times before this. Okay, he's thought about Rhaegar already. So for the first time in years, finding himself remembering Rhaegar Targaryen is just stupid. It's a stupid line. We've the fandom, and me included, has obsessed over this line. It's so dumb. It's just like I wish it were not there. Okay, like, how is it that for the first time in years he found himself remembering Rhaegar Targaryen? That is stupid. That is just dumb. If this is the true father of Jon Snow, especially dumb. But also, like, if this is the guy that your dead sister ran off with, you're going to be thinking about him a lot. And he talks about Rhaegar all over the place. Like, this is not the first time in years that he's remembered Rhaegar Targaryen. God, I think if there's one sentence that needs to be deleted from a Game of Thrones, it's this sentence. Like, what is going on? For the first time in years, he found himself remembering Rhaegar Targaryen. Jeez. For the first time in years, Harry Potter found himself thinking about Ron Weasley. Like, what? Like, what? Like, what? It's ridiculous. Ridiculous line. Oh, God. Why does this exist? He wondered if Rhaegar frequented brothels. Somehow he thought not. But it's weird. I mean, he's trying to think, like, is Rhaegar the type of person that would frequent brothels? Like, but then why is he cheating on his wife? You know, like, what does Ned Stark know about Rhaegar Targaryen? Like, he cheated on his wife, right? Somehow he thought not. I mean, I guess that's where we get the somehow. You know, what does Ned know about Rhaegar Targaryen? Nothing. Did you ever live in the same city as Rhaegar Targaryen? No. And on top of, like, this whole paragraph being weird, there was no answer Ned Stark could give to that but a frown. It's kind of like, that would fit better if the Littlefinger joke wasn't there. Because he says, why kill him? There was no answer that Ned Stark could give to that but a frown. So, but the problem is that we've got this Littlefinger comment. And so, like, to say there's no answer, you've kind of interrupted the flow. I wonder if, like, George went back again and, like, threw in this, like, Littlefinger joke, because it is a good Littlefinger joke. A lot of care on that. He just, but around it, you come up with this good joke here, and then this carelessness. Of course, it's also careless that, like, he all of a sudden is revealing to Littlefinger that he thinks that Jon Arryn was murdered. Because, I mean, I guess when he and Kat were there, maybe they talked to him then. Must have been off page, but, like, I guess it's believable that they were like thinking about. If they're thinking about the dagger, they must assume that the Lannisters killed Jon Arryn and revealed that to Littlefinger. The rain was falling harder now, stinging his eyes and drumming against the ground. Rivers of black water were running down the hill when Jory called out, "My lord!" his voice hoarse with alarm. And in an instant, the street was full of soldiers. Ned glimpsed rings mail over leather, gauntlets and greaves, steel helms and golden lions and crests. Their cloaks clung to their backs, sodden with rain. Used sodden again. He had no time to count, but they were at least 10. A line of them on foot, blocking the street with longswords and iron-tipped spears. Behind, he heard wild cry, and then he turned his horse, and there were more on the back, cutting off their retreat. Jory's sword came singing from its scabbard. "Make way or die! The wolves are howling," their leaders said. Ned could see rain running down his face. Such a small pack, though. Littlefinger walked his horse forward, step by careful step. "What's the meaning of this? This is the hand of the king." He was the hand of the king. The mud muffled the hooves of the blood-bay stallion. The line parted before him. On a golden breastplate, the Lion of Lannister roared its defiance. Now, if truth be told, I'm not sure what he is. How Jaime found Ned is also never discussed. Maybe Varys was spying and told him. Never discussed, though. I mean, look, King's Landing is a big city, and they just, does he know that Ned is out and about? Looking at brothels with Littlefinger? It's weird. "Lannister, this is madness," Littlefinger said. "Let us pass. We are expected back at the castle. What do you think you're doing?" "He knows what he's doing," Ned said calmly. Jaime Lannister smiled. "Quite true. I'm looking for my brother. You remember my brother, don't you, Lord Stark? He was with us at Winterfell. Fair-haired, mismatched eyes, sharp of tongue, a short man." "I remember him well," Ned replied. It would seem he has met some trouble on the road. My lord father is quite vexed. You would not perchance have any notion who might have wished my brother ill, would you?" I also wonder about the communication thing here. How does he know that his father is vexed? Did it get to his father and then his father sent a raven? And then Pycelle gave him the information? And did Pycelle know that did Pycelle somehow figure out that they were walking to the brothel? "Your brother has been taken at my command to answer for his crimes," Ned Stark said. Littlefinger groaned in dismay. "My lords!" Sir Jaime ripped his longsword from his sheath and urged his stallion forward. "Show me your steel, Lord Eddard. I'll butcher you like Aerys if I must, but I'd sooner you died it with a blade in your hand." He gave Littlefinger a cool, contemptuous glance. "Lord Baelish, I'd leave here in haste if you did not care to get bloodstains on my costly clothing." Littlefinger did not need to be urged. "I'll bring the city watch," he promised Ned. The Lannister line parted to let him through and closed behind him. Littlefinger put his heels to his mare and vanished around a corner. Ned's men had drawn his swords, but they were 3 against 20. Eyes watched from nearby windows and doors, and no one was about to intervene. His party was mounted, the Lannisters on foot, save for Jaime himself. A charge might win them free, but it seemed to Eddard Stark that they had a surer, safer tactic. "Kill me," he warned the Kingslayer, "and Catelyn will most certainly slay Tyrion." Jaime Lannister poked at Ned's chest with the gilded sword that had sipped the blood of the last of the Dragon Kings. "Would she, the noble Catelyn Tully of Riverrun, murder a hostage? I think not," he sighed. "But I'm not willing to chance my brother's life on a woman's honor." Jaime slid the golden sword into its sheath. "So I suppose I'll let you run back to Robert to tell him how I frightened you. I wonder if he'll care." Jaime pushed his wet hair back with his fingers and wheeled his horse around. When he was beyond the line of swordsmen, he glanced back at his captain. "Traegar, see that no harm comes to Lord Stark." "As you say, my lord." Um, all right. Traegar is the captain of the yeah. So Traegar. It's weird because Traegar is it's also the name of the, I think, the Lyseni guy who is Lyness Hightower's lover. But this guy's captain of the guards. He later dies of his wounds. Traegar, seeing that no harm comes to Lord Stark, as you say, my lord. Still, we wouldn't want him to leave entirely unchastened. So, through the night and rain, he glimpsed the white of Jaime's smile. Kill his men. No! Ned Stark screamed, clawing for his sword. Jaime was already cantering off down the street as he heard Wow shout. Men closed from both sides. Ned rode one down, cutting at phantoms in red cloaks who gave way before him. Jory Cassell put his heel into his mount and charged. A steel... Oh, right. It was... He said... It was... They were mounted and Jaime is on foot. It's three, yeah. 3 against 20. His party was mounted. Lannisters were on foot, save Jaime. Okay. It's funny because the show events are so different on this. Like, they just get into a fight and they try to make Jaime seem honorable because like Ned is like cut in the leg, and he's like, oh, it wasn't a clean kill, you know, versus just like the brazen, brutal, just kill his men, you know. Um, Ned galloped to him, bringing the longsword to Traegar. Okay. Jorah Cassell put his heel into his mountain charge. The steel shod hoof caught a Lannister guardsman in the face with a sickening crunch. The second man reeled away for an instant. Jorah was free. Wild curse as a man pulled him off his dying horse, sword slashing in the rain. Ned galloped to him, bringing his longsword down on Traegar's helm. The jolt of impact made him grit his teeth. Traegar stumbled to his knees, his lion crest sheared in half, blood running down his face. Heward was hacking at hands that had seized his bridle when a spear caught him in the belly. Suddenly, Jorah was back among them, a red rain flying from his sword. No, Ned shouted, Jorah, away! Ned's horse slipped under him and came crashing down in the mud. There was a moment of blinding pain and the taste of blood in his mouth. He saw them cut the legs from Jorah's mount and drag him to the earth, sword rising and falling as they closed in around him. When Ned's horse lurched back to its feet, he tried to rise, only to fall again, choking on his scream. He could see the splintered bone poking through his calf. Broke his leg. It was the last thing he saw for a time. The rain came down and down and down. When he opened his eyes again, Lord Eddard Stark was alone with his dead. His horse moved closer, caught the rank scent of blood, and galloped away. At least the horse lived. Ned began to drag himself through the mud, gritting his teeth at the agony in his leg. It seemed to take years. Faces watched from candlelit windows, and people began to emerge from alleys and doors, and no one moved to help. Littlefinger and the City Watch found him there in the streets, cradling Jorah Cassell's body in his arms. Somewhere, the gold cloaks found a litter, but the trip back to the castle was a blur of agony. And Ned lost consciousness more than once. He remembered seeing the red keep looming ahead of him in the first gray light of dawn. The rain had darkened the pale pink stones of the massive walls to the color of blood. Then Grand Maester Pycelle was looming over him, holding a cup, whispering, Drink, my lord, here, the milk of the poppy for your pain. He remembered swallowing, and Pycelle was telling him someone to heat the wine to boiling and fetch him clean silk. And that was the last he knew. Yeah, the Westerosi medical technology is solidly 19th century. It is way beyond the Middle Ages. The fact that they know about, um, you know, disinfecting wounds and things like that with by boiling wine. I mean, good. It's good stuff. Good stuff. Anyway, certainly an exciting end to the chapter. We get some great Littlefinger lines, but again, this has so many weird. There's so much weirdness in here with regards to Lyanna and Rhaegar and promises and stuff like that. That going through it now, I'm fairly convinced that George had mystery boxed this and hadn't worked it all out. What the promises were and why they're later broken, and Rhaegar and Lyanna's feelings towards Rhaegar and all these sorts of things. It just doesn't. It all doesn't square. This chapter contradicts itself so much. But a fun chapter and short and breezy, even though it took me a pretty long time. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.